Hey guys, welcome back to Pop Culture with Pat. Today I'm giving you my review of Zack Snyder's Justice League.
They said the age of heroes would never come again.
It will. It has to.
So the theatrical version of this movie, came out several years ago, and by now everyone's heard the stories about how Zack had to leave the project and they had to finish up the film, so they ended up bringing on Joss Whedon to finish up the film. And you just heard there was a lot of like studio involvement and stuff like that, and basically what we ended up getting in a theatrical cut was vastly different compared to what was like Zack's like original vision. And a lot of people were really pissed off about that, and I mean, I feel they're rightly so. When someone doesn't get to, we get a release of like a film and it's like, yeah, that wasn't what the director's original vision was. I mean, that definitely sucks. So I totally could see why people were pissed about that. Now, something for you guys that might blow some of your minds. I know some of the people that, that know me, especially where I'm a big superhero, comic book movie person. I love those, kind of movies. But I actually never saw the theatrical version of the film that came out a couple years ago. Yeah, I know. A lot of you people are probably like, what? Like, how did you not see that movie a couple years ago? And, okay, so the movie was coming out, and I had seen, like Man of Steel, Batman vs. Superman, and, the films like that. And I just remember, like, the trailer coming out for the film, and it just, like, it was something that just, like, never wowed me. And for some reason, I just never saw it in theaters, and I just haven't seen it up to this point. And I remember when it came out, it got a lot of bad reviews, and that wasn't like the reason why, I mainly didn't see it. I just really didn't have like an interest at the time. I'm kind of glad that I did, because now, I got to go into this movie, the Zack Snyder version. I got to go into it with a fresh perspective. So this is coming from someone, again, who did not see that original theatrical version that came out. And I like both the DC and Marvel. But yeah, so I just wanted to give you guys that little, preface before I kind of get into the rest of the review. And just a heads up, I'm going to try and stay spoiler free for the most part. There might be like tiny little spoilers. I'm definitely not going to go into depth with anything or anything that wasn't in trailers, anything that was not in trailers or anything like that. So just a heads up, if you don't want any spoilers at all, like maybe come back afterwards and watch this. But for the most part, it's going to be like minor, if anything like that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about this film. So the film takes place after the events of Batman, versus Superman. Like right in the beginning, we got to kind of get to see that aftermath, where Superman, he had sacrificed himself to help kill Doomsday. And, at this point, a little bit later on, like the world's, mourning the loss of Superman. And meanwhile, we have Batman, who is trying to put together a team of superheroes to help defend the world against an oncoming invasion that, we heard referenced back at the end of Batman vs. Superman when Lex Luthor was talking about that. So he's trying to put together this team. So that's kind of the basic general plot, idea of this film, without going into too many details. For this movie, we get the main villain of the film, for the most part, is pretty much his name is Steppenwolf, and his goal is, he's in debt to Darkseid, who kind of looms in the background in this film. You don't see him like a ton, so he's kind of like, almost like, the Thanos level threat as far as like the MCU, what they did with him, leading up until like Infinity War and Endgame and stuff like that. So that's kind of his role. So Steppenwolf is the main character of this film, and his whole goal is to trying to put together these three mother cubes in order to fuse them together and basically bring about like the end of the world, because he's trying to bring Darkseid to the planet and basically like take over. One of the things that I really, really liked about this movie, and that from what I understand, again, I did not see the theatrical version released a couple of years ago. So this is just going based off what I've kind of heard from friends and different fans and stuff like that. But one of the things that I really liked in this movie is that I felt like each one of the Justice League characters got a good amount of character development, and they got their own moments to shine throughout the film. And from what I heard, that was something that was kind of completely missing really in the original film. Like some people, like Cyborg, basically his whole character development, from what I heard, was kind of basically just like thrown out the window. And we've seen, if you've been paying attention to all the things going on with Ray Fisher, he was pretty pissed. And if that was the case, I mean, I would understand. It's like, especially this was his first kind of big like role, and to have like a lot of your scenes and stuff like that kind of thrown out, that would really suck. So I totally understand that. So that was one of the things. It's like, especially where we didn't, this is really kind of the first time where we get to see significant scenes with each one of these characters, minus obviously like Batman and Wonder Woman, where we got like their films, but like Flash and Cyborg, don't really know a whole lot about them. So really appreciated getting to see a little bit more about like those characters. Another thing that I have a lot of praise to say for this film is that some of the action scenes in here were freaking badass. So probably one of my favorite scenes was right kind of near in the beginning of the film, and I won't go into super detail. Like I said, I'm going to try and stay spoiler free, but it is a scene involving like Wonder Woman, and there's these group of terrorists, and yeah, that was some amazing action with Wonder Woman there. Gal Gadot really sold it, as far as like that whole scene goes. So if you guys haven't seen the film, you obviously know what I'm like talking about, but that was one of my favorite scenes. I also really liked the whole battle like underneath like Gotham, underneath like the waterways or whatever. That was pretty cool as well. So this movie overall definitely had some really cool action sequences throughout, and that was one of my favorite aspects as well. I also thought for the most part, because some of the things that people have said with like previous like DCEU films and stuff like that is like, oh, all the DCEU is just like super serious, and it needs to be more like Marvel. And I don't necessarily think that's the case. They definitely, I think, the MCU and the DCU, or whatever they're going to be calling it like going forward, they need to be separate. You don't want them both like the same thing, because it's like you want some variety. At least I know I do. But I think one of the things that Zack Snyder did a good job with, his version of this film, is that I thought he did a good job of balancing the film. Like, there is definitely, some darker like elements. And I mean, I believe this was like rated R or like mature or whatever on HBO Max, because there's a couple like F-bombs and like stuff like that, blood and different things. That was really cool. I was like, oh shit, like a really dark kind of badass like, comic book movie. But I think they did a good job of balancing the darker elements, as well as there is some like comedy like sprinkled throughout the film, and I thought he did a good job as far as balancing that stuff. Last things, as far as like the positives goes for this film, I would say that the film is 4 hours long, and for some people that sounds like, ooh, like I don't know if I want to sit down and watch a 4-hour movie. The good thing is it's on HBO Max, so I mean you could always pause it, take a break if you have to. I didn't really have to for the most part. I honestly felt that even though this has a 4-hour runtime, for me, for the most part, I thought the pacing was done pretty well. Like, sure, and we'll kind of go into that like in the negatives like in a second. Like, sure, there was some scenes that I thought maybe weren't completely necessary, and those could have been taken out. But it's not like a whole like big sections of the film where it's like, oh, like this was just like a complete like waste of time. So there was like some scenes that could have been taken out, but for the most part, it didn't really feel like a 4-hour film to me. So I thought, that's obviously a big plus too, because like going into watching the movie, it's like, oh, like, I don't know, sit down here for like 4 hours. It's kind of like asking a lot, especially if the movie ended up, turning out not to be, I didn't like it as much as I thought, like I would. If it wasn't a good film, it's like 4 hours is a long time to sit through. So I can definitely tell you guys that is not the case with the Justice League. All right, so as far as negatives for the film, I do have a couple things that are kind of like nitpicky. They're not like big deals, but I just kind of mentioned, as far as like, there is some scenes in the film that I felt like I was like, yeah, you probably could have cut that out and maybe got this movie down to like 3.5 like hours. That probably would be like a good amount of runtime. But like for example, there's one scene in the film where like Aquaman, he saves this guy who's like at sea, and afterwards he goes over to like this dock, and like the waves are crashing, like the slow motion signature Zack Snyder stuff. And he's just like standing there. He takes his like shirt off, and he's just like standing there for like, I don't know, like a few minutes or whatever. And I was just sitting there, and I'm just like, is this like really like a necessary scene? Like, is it advancing the plot or anything like that? And it's like, no, not really. There was also a sequence with the Flash involving, like a car crash, and I won't go into like too many other like details, but that I felt like, maybe wasn't completely like necessary either. And for me, it might be more because like, honestly guys, I'm just not a huge fan out of like everyone in the Justice League, watching this film now. I'm just really not a big fan of the actor as like the Flash. So even though I was glad we got to explore a little bit more of his background, just like him as a character didn't always work for me. Like he did have some cool moments, like getting to see his powers and stuff like that. But there was just like other times where I'm like, yeah, like I just don't really care about like your character that much. So that probably has to do with, you know, his like scene, like why I didn't think that needed to be in there. I just wasn't a big fan of the Flash like overall, and I do like, you know, the character of like the Flash from like the comics and stuff like that. I just don't think the actor, he's not like I'm not the biggest fan of him, I guess, is at least in this role. And then the last thing, you know, just like Steppenwolf, as far as like a villain goes, from what like I saw like pictures and stuff like that, he definitely looks better in this film. But I think overall, you know, as far as like a villain, like a character goes, like I felt he was a little generic. I did hear that, you know, one of his particular scenes where he fights Wonder Woman, he does have some like, you know, better dialogue and stuff like that, which is great. But I thought overall he was a little generic, and that's something. I mean, the MCU's had like issues with like some of like, you know, their villains being like a little generic and stuff like that goes. So I mean, it's not just saying like, hey, like it's a DC villain, like I think he sucks. But you know, overall he looked cool and looked better than what previously, you know, what he was in the theatrical cut. But he was just kind of like generic, and it's like, I would much rather just see more of like Darkseid and kind of see, you know, what he's about. But for this film, he's kind of, like I said, he's more of like the looming threat that they would be kind of looking at more down the line, probably in like the next film or whatever. So we don't get to see as much with him, unfortunately. So overall, guys, for someone who, you know, didn't really want to see the theatrical version of the Justice League that came out, you know, a few years ago, and for someone who, you know, I was excited to see this just because it was like the original version, but I wasn't like super pumped like out of my mind or anything like that. So for someone like that going into this film with those kind of expectations, I gotta say that I really actually had a lot of fun with this film. It was a lot better than I was expecting it to be. And again, that's coming from someone who didn't see the theatrical version, and you know, I like both Marvel and DC. So I think as far as like a grade, I would give this probably like a solid 8 out of 10. It had a lot of fun, action-packed sequences, you know, throughout. And then just the other thing, like I said, it gave you moments to breathe with each one of our characters, and they each kind of got their moments to shine. And those are some of the biggest compliments that I can give this film. So overall, if you're a fan of comic book movies, you know, Marvel, DC, I think you guys, you know, should definitely check it out. It's worth watching. And overall, again, I give this movie an 8 out of 10. So I want to hear what you guys, you know, have to think of the movie. You know, if you have seen it, let me know what your thoughts are down below in the comments. And for all the people who, which I feel like is like most people, I'm probably one of the few that didn't see like the original, you know, theatrical version. Let me know kind of what your thoughts are comparing like the two movies. You know, try to avoid spoilers for the most part if you can, just to kind of give people more time to watch this. But I just want to hear like your overall thoughts on like the two films. So let me know down below in the comments. If you are new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button as well as the bell button next to it, just so that way you get notifications for all my new videos. Please give this video a thumbs up, as I say this all the time, but guys, I really mean it. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm. And if you can leave a comment, you know, that is great as well. And as always, guys, please make sure to check back for more pop culture with Pat.